Welcome to Char. My name is Rami Rivera-Frankel, and I'm here with Grammy Award-winning musician, Nelson Marquez. What's up, Nelson?
What's up, Rami? Good to see you, brother.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for joining me today. Today, we're going to be talking with Martin Gomez, one of the co-founders and the chief operating officer of Wing AI. And when I mean AI, I mean artificial intelligence. Hi, Martin. Welcome to Char.
Hey, Rami, how's it going? It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to talk to you guys.
Hey, Martin.
So, Martin, can you tell us about growing up in Baldwin Park and what that was like for you?
Yeah, definitely. Baldwin Park was the typical, middle class, sort of working class community. It really epitomizes the suburbs of America. It's only really famous for one reason only, Baldwin Park, and that's because the first In-N-Out was made there. Other than that, it's a working class community centered around sports, Hispanic values. Growing up as a first generation American, coming from parents that, that immigrated from Mexico, a lot of the sort of dreams and objectives of the community is to send people to college. And so there's sort of a big movement, in Baldwin Park. Generally, you're growing up of pushing people to go to college. And so, that's kind of what sort of led my journey here.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's awesome. Are you the first generation college graduate?
Technically, in the United States, I'm the first person in my family that's ever graduated a four-year university. So yeah, that was a huge accomplishment. Obviously, meant a lot for my dad, meant a lot for my family. And it's interesting because I've been the first of many to do a lot of things. I was the first person probably in my family to probably ever travel, 2,000 miles away from the continent, and that's ever been on the other side of the hemisphere. There's a lot of first things that, the first person to have access to a computer, the first person to have access to a cell phone, right? And so I was always that first, almost like that first person. I'm millennial Gen Z 96, so didn't really grow up with the cell phone, but ended up obviously like everyone else transitioned into it. So I was sort of the first to get internet, first to get a computer. So really, a lot of that sort of pressure almost felt like it was Hercules-like pressure that everything was sort of thrown on top of me, and I had to sort of figure it out, sort of dissect a lot of innovation, and really just grow with it, and have no one really to have that actual the tenure support, right? That my parents weren't engineers, they weren't IT people. Setting up a router, things like that. All those things were done by someone like myself.
How did you get into UC Irvine?
Yeah, so just like every other person around there, everyone hears UCLA because that's like the school, right? And had never heard about UC Irvine, didn't even know what it even existed. I literally remember that we did a job right across the street from UC Irvine, and when I moved in eventually to the community, I remembered that I had a flashback. But I heard about UC Irvine from a math teacher who told me that I was good at math, which I wasn't. But she believed that I was. My brother's a lot smarter than me on that front. So she told me she went to UC Irvine, loved it, that it's a great community, very safe, very different, right? You can leave your bicycle in the front yard and everything's going to be okay. It's sort of that kind of community, which obviously for me was, foreign. And so, for us, a lot of that, for a lot of people that applied to UC Irvine, it was on the list at the very bottom because, the UC Irvine towards the bottom, right? You have Berkeley at LA, you have UCR because a lot of people end up going there. So Irvine was just on the list, and I just applied to it. Frankly, there wasn't anything beautiful about it that caught my eye. It was honestly just fundamental luck that actually that ended up being the school that I applied to. And I got into a few Cal States, didn't get into UCLA, didn't get into Berkeley, didn't even apply to San Diego. I thought I wanted to stay local, and I figured probably not going to get into UC Irvine anyways. But then from that sort of logic at that point, a lot of the faculty that knew me, saw my grades and said, you should apply for an Ivy League. And, I didn't know which one to apply. So I just picked one out of the box. I'm like, oh, Princeton sounds like a cool one. I looked at the campus, applied to Princeton, wrote the five page essays, and got into Princeton. Long story short, they didn't give me a full ride, so it was still going to be really meaningfully expensive. So then eventually I heard from UC Irvine that I had been accepted. They gave me the two giant grants, and then figured out a lot of the people there were saying, hey, you should apply to FAFSA. What's FAFSA? Got the FAFSA process done, and I realized oh, that's basically almost a full ride for the first 3 years. So cost wise, again, growing up, earning a lot of the dollars that we worked on in the construction and landscaping, we realized what, is it really worth going that far for an Ivy League? At the time, I didn't know that what it meant, and so forth. But no, by no means, I think UCI was a great choice for me. It was close to home where, I could live away, but still come back if needed. It was far enough to see a different world, see a group of completely different people with different ambitions. And so, yeah, I'm super, super fortunate for that reason.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you mentioned that you remember doing a job. What kind of job were you doing across the street from the university?
Yeah, so there was this client that my dad had that's a real estate investor. Now I know he's an investor, but back then I just thought he owned a lot of houses for the heck of it. And we were installing marathon grass. Marathon grass is this really beautiful piece of green grass that usually these giant trucks from like Lowe's, Home Depots come deliver. And if you're a professional company, you have a crane that unloads them and then you move them, and you have like 10 employees. At the time, and still this day, where we're not this huge, we weren't this huge company, right? We were like a 3 or 4 person team. So I just remember, being someone like that was wheelbarrowing grass around, like, age of 10, because that was a normal thing in at least Baldwin Park from my father's perspective, because he had done the same thing at the age of 10. And so I remember looking at the campus and seeing the anteater like statue, and I wasn't really thinking this was like elementary time, probably, if not early middle school. But then I actually went back, lived in the apartments adjacent to that community, and I saw it, and that's sort of what we were doing. So I was a landscaping grass installation, so a typical landscaping job that your average person would probably do, for a real estate client. It's optimizing the home and enhancing probably its value.
That's amazing. That's an amazing journey to be basically doing landscape and labor to eventually attending the university there. That's a beautiful journey right there. And yes. So you were at UCI. You started with biology and some of the earth sciences, it sounds, or rather medical sciences, or maybe biology. I don't know what.
Yeah, it was pharmaceutical sciences. So it's somewhere in the middle. It's the hardest one.
Right. So you were at UCI studying pharmaceutical biology, and you found out that wasn't really your calling and your passion. So how did you make the transition into the field that you ended up studying?
Yeah, so I, after taking the last final for my last final class, I realized, I worked really hard for this, but I felt like I got no value from it. Like, it was knowledge, but it wasn't like I want to wake up every day and actually do that. It clicked right then and there, speaking to a lot of the third, fourth years, right? Which was probably the smartest thing I've ever done in my undergrad, second to starting the company. It was talking to people that were older than me. And apparently that's a really, heavy trend. If you look on Reddit online, that's a really common trend amongst people that want to be that. And so, because a lot of it sort of comes from this parental pressure of like trying to, increase the status of where you are and progress. And so they sort of wrap that as like a mandate almost. And so, for what made me transition was I actually was walking out on my final, funny enough, and I was looking at the nice building that was a new building. It was a law school. And, there was a vending machine there. I hadn't eaten that day. Finals week, people don't eat it. I really wanted to get these like Oreo cookies because I was a big fan of that. They were super cheap. And I looked at the new building and I saw, people looked happier. They looked happy at the law school. And, whereas at the Bible school, everyone's like, they look sadder. They look a lot more like they're worked up. And so, I thought about it. I'm like, why is that a thing? So I went home, looked up the new law school building. Apparently they had this like law school. I mean, I knew what lawyers were, didn't really know that the full scope of the law department. Obviously they have the academic study side, they have the lawyer side, and they have like the policy side of things. And so looked it up, reached out to a professor that was doing kind of the intro class, because I figured, what, I'm gonna have to start over for an intro class to get into the major. And she basically said, yeah, we're actually full for the next semester, but you can sit in the first class, and if someone drops out, you can join the class, and if you join the class, you can start the major. Did that. It was an intro to sort of the criminal law theory generally, very philosophical. So I thought, oh God, we're going philosophical, so we're going back in time. But then it got really interesting. We sort of transitioned into a constitutional law class, and I realized like, hey, this is actually interesting. There's actually logical implications to like what we're doing today. There's things that I experienced and so forth, and I was really interested. I ended up taking the criminal law route, and in there the load of civil litigation, and it really got interested in like the methodical process of organizing, strategy, to understand cases. And really there's a lot of in-depth sort of dynamics that happen in sort of the law classes that people often don't really realize, because obviously being a lawyer is like the output, but being like the legal analyst is probably the most important part in the whole journey. So that's how I got into the major, and stuck with it and graduated 4 years later with it.
That's fascinating. That's great. I'm fascinated by the law, because to me, it's basically the architecture and the framework for how societies run. And so an understanding common law and understanding the various rules and processes that we really formulate the rules of civilization. And I'm also fascinated by that process and by the philosophical and thought practice and applying the theoretical to the actual, and reading the case studies and the law is, to me, has always been fascinating as well.
I was just going to say, there's very similar applications to be like the way to process a case versus process a business problem. There's so many sort of similarities there. I can totally relate to that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you're in this process. I read that you some volunteer work as well during this time and working for some nonprofits.
Yeah. So that's part of the legal route, right? It takes you in sort of multidimensional direction. So I realized, what does the law field look like? So, I didn't know what, by the way, by the time at that point, I didn't know what a nonprofit was. I assumed all businesses made money. and so I didn't really understand the concept of like what a nonprofit is at the legal level and all at the financial level. So nonprofit work got interested early on. There was a community / like college fair, where nonprofits came, and I was like, hey, I should probably do an internship. That sounds like an important thing that, again, the counselors there at East Irvine aren't really telling you because they treat you as adults. And the counselors at the high school aren't telling you because of the resources. And so, you can kind of figure it out, what, an internship is probably a good idea. So I walked through the booths. I saw one called CASA, which is the Court Appointed Special Advocates Group based out of Orange County, and I believe a few other areas. And I really, resonated with what their mission was. They're really just representing, people that are underrepresented, legally. So, a lot of the sort of the youth in the Santa Ana area, Garden Grove area, oftentimes have a lot of issues with their families and so forth. And so they require a lot of legal representation. Obviously, there was no lawyer, but it was mostly sort of to advocate their needs. And so it was really interesting. I started realizing like, oh wait, there's like this whole like dimensions of divisions of law. It's not just like you're a lawyer that sit in a nice office with the tie. It's like there's like actual like proactive work. And so got involved with that nonprofit, got involved with the OC Bar Foundation, very similar way, jumping around and realizing that they're and then really trying to understand like what the objective of the company was. Because then I realized like, wait, there's much more than just being a lawyer, engineer, or a doctor. There's so much more in the world than that. And then I started taking an interest in business, and then ultimately jumped around, did a few internships in a couple of startups, worked at a couple of startups full time, and then eventually ended up, I got really interested in generally the business sector. So then I worked at a completely polar opposite company doing investments. Think about that, like jumping from like construction to nonprofits law to like investments. Went on YouTube the night before the interview, taught myself how to do investments on YouTube. And really, the generally the strategies for how to invest in equities and things like that. And did the interview, the guy liked me, and that's how I started Kickstarter. I just kind of figured it out on the way.
Yeah, I can see how, and there's definitely different strategies of investing. Whether you're investing in established companies, but you can definitely see like a major growth when you're involved in startups, and there's something exciting about founding something new and creating something new. So how did you end up meeting your partners?
Yeah, that's a fun story. So my co-founder, his name is Char, he's the CEO of Wing. He wasn't my roommate, but he was my doormate. So a Middleware at UC Irvine is sort of one of the major communities, 3-story buildings, 16 different buildings separated by, sort of like grass and like a fence area. And, he was on the 3rd floor where sort of a lot of the international students were from China, from India, stuff like that. He was from Hong Kong. I knew of him, and I casually one day ran into him. He was hacking away at something, in one of the lobbies. I just thought that, he was so into it, but like the energy was there. And we basically kind of made the introduction, like, who are you? I see you you're the guy that runs around the scooter. He had a little like razor scooter that he'd get out around because he was used to Hong Kong's mobility system. That's always like train or bus and somewhat walking, but UC Irvine is notorious for those big hills on the campus. And so he was the guy with the scooter, and I recognized him. And so we started talking, and I thought he was a cool guy. And I back then, most of the people that my friends were in other dorms. And so started talking to him, started hanging out. And what I realized at the time is, we were both 18 at the time, but it's almost like he was like 5 years ahead of me, if not 10, as far as knowledge, industry experience, just being sort of like the quote unquote woke in the world. And I was like street smart. He was very like future smart. And I didn't know what AI, what programming or Python was. Didn't know anything about that. I just thought engineers and doctors, but that's how I existed. And so, yeah, we started connecting there. Eventually, he sort of got me interested in business, because I was interning and doing things like that. And he started giving me a little bit of advice, like, you should look for an internship for a consulting company, and you should do this for your resume and just like that. And then I kind of asked him, why are you here in college? Like, you don't even go to class. He was notorious for not going to class because he was an excellent programmer. I didn't go as far as call him a prodigy type programmer. Wow. He never went to class, but he got A's in the classes and B's. And, I asked him, how are you doing that? I worked at Morgan Stanley doing AI, when I was 14 and 15. And what does that mean? So why are you here? He's like, I came to America because I wanted to start a company. And I was like, oh, wow. Like I'm like 10 years behind someone else. And so I realized, what does it actually mean? I'm hearing my bosses talking about startups. I'm hearing people, seeing Joy Run come in and advertising on campus, Uber Eats, same thing, Uber. What does that actually mean? And so we, eventually got interested, became really good friends, best of friends to this day. And, we started just chalking ideas down on a whiteboard, just like that, very similar to that. We would just write down ideas of like, imagine if the world can do this. And eventually we started thinking about what that actually would look like. And then we came up with the idea of the company, which is obviously completely different than what it is now. Thankfully, once we started to get off the ground, I realized that I was going to be the people guy that was going to go out and make stuff happen, the muscle of the company, if you will. Eventually transitioned to also being the brains. He was the pure brains, and I was sort of the heart and the muscle of the company. Early on, I guess the idea. And so, yeah, and then recruiting a third co-founder about a year and a half later, a fourth co-founder about 2 years later, and that's how we have the four co-founders today.
Oh, nice. That's wonderful. What is, like, how would you describe to the layperson, like, what artificial intelligence is? To like a layperson, Main Street, a regular guy, a Joe.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I've had this conversation with my parents. They ask you like, oh, what is AI? I'm like, well, AI is just like a really smart computer system that understands you. It's funny because, nowadays my dad has YouTube on his TV because, the YouTube apps with smart TVs. And I'm like, the easy representation is when you click a video and the next video pops up, is something you're interested in. It wasn't lucky. It was predicted. And it's predicted by a system that understands you and predicted what you'd probably like. And so AI is just basically a forward-thinking system, and so it's certainly difficult, right? I don't know if you've probably tried it as well. If I speak to my parents about it, it's almost like something that's sort of unfathomable, that it's not possible to really truly grasp what it actually is. And I certainly don't blame them or blame people around us, but it's that concept just doesn't exist in Baldwin Park, right? It's like, oh, you work at Amazon or FedEx doing deliveries. I get it, but what's programming, like computers, like hardware fixing the microchips? No, it's building software. And so the way I explain it is just, in the way I just described.
Yeah, that's a great definition. AI is a forward-thinking system.
Yeah, simple as that.
That's great. Yeah, right. So you started your company. You met the co-founders. How did you come up with the name?
Yes, and initially, actually, it was called something completely different. It was called PIPY, P-I-P-P-Y, and it was like an acronym for Person Intelligent Project Dealer, something like that. Karan had this like this old company called us. He wanted to bring it back to life, create a logo, and so the name will start off as like PIPY, and then I just thought it was like silly, so why not? And I guess we can change it. Eventually, we got a lot of feedback that sounds awkward, that doesn't look right, and stuff like that. and so obviously, but the logo was actually kind of beautiful, actually, to that, very unique. We had shirts and so forth. And so eventually, when we realized that the first version of our company, we wanted to build a call Uber, like basically Postmates and Uber Eats type service, but for other tasks only on college campuses, run by students, basically supplied by students, and we're college students. We're also the customers. And so because the idea started because we were sitting in our dorm. It was like 3 a.m. My parents called me midnight saying, "Hey, we're gonna come by visit you tomorrow morning at 8 a.m." His parents, same thing, and we were both like, "Whoa, that can't happen. My dorm is a mess." Mind you, my father's a very organized person, very strict, non-complacent, right? And so we realized, oh man, this is not going to happen. I had a final the next day. There's just no way I'm going to get it done. We started looking in line for options, and people would literally come help us clean because we were just not going to do it because we were busy trying to produce ideas and so forth. Jack in a box, bags everywhere. Think of it like a typical, male college dorm. This now it obviously sounds worse than it probably was, but we realized, why isn't there a really easy way to get stuff done now? Why is it $300 now or $500 now? So then we started posting on the Facebook pages for the dorm because we had Facebook groups. Like, hey, anyone want to come do it? People started bidding $7, $10, $12, and we just obviously chose the cheapest one. They came, they did it. We paid them through Venmo, and it was like, wow, wait, that's something interesting. People were willing to do ad hoc work affordably if it was in close proximity, and they're willing to do it affordably, and much more importantly, easily. And so that's like, way to click. Let's build a mobile app to build basically an assistant for college students that can get stuff done for people, and people start using it for I'll sit in class for you and take notes for $5 because I don't want to go to class, but I want the notes, right? We had iClickers where you click for attendance. Like that's a premium. It's $20, right, to click for attendance, right? We got really creative with what we did on campus, and so that's how it sort of came about. And so eventually we realized, the idea is Pibby was the wrong name. So wing came about, people just want to wing it last minute. We want to be your wingman, a person there for you when you most need us. Wing it last minute when you're on the run and you're busy. That was sort of why it came to be as that name.
Oh, nice. That's great. Tell us about your journey. So you started this company, and at what point did you think about getting your MBA from Chapman University?
Yeah, that was towards the end of my 4 years. I realized that by the way, in between those second, third, fourth, you realize we're gonna do this startup, we're gonna do it right. I know nothing about business other than my internships. So I started showing up to the 8 a.m. business classes. So I wake up at 6, despite my class didn't start at noon. I wake up at 6 to go to the 8 a.m. business class that I was not registered for, by the way. I took the test, took the finals for those classes, didn't get a grade on my transcript, but I did get it in an email. And so I realized okay, you know what? The best way to teach myself business was to do the major business. The reason I couldn't do the major formally because business is super impacted everywhere. Everyone wants to do business, and wants to actually put in the work. And so right away, 8 a.m. I was there every morning, learning accounting, learning marketing, right? What averaging meant. Then Karan gave me a giant PDF. He's like, read this book, watch this YouTuber that talks about it. And I would spend hours every day just reading what is the go-to-market strategy? What is the startup? What does financing mean? And so by the end of the 4 years, right, I basically had a mentor MBA. And so I realized, okay, well, my experience on paper is I run a startup. I did a few, consulting gigs here and there for things that made sense. I'm a people's guy. I love talking to people. I love selling the ideas, but I don't have the business competencies. I have the foundation, but not the refined element of it. So that's why I ended up wanting to do the MBA. So fourth year, funny enough, towards the end, I was like, you know what? Let's take the LSAT for fun. I want to see if I'd actually get into the law school. So I took the LSAT. Then a month later, I studied for the GRE, did it. Got into Chapman right away. Stayed at Chapman because the team was very local, so I wanted to stay local. So the MBA came about as almost like a last minute way to refine my knowledge and refine my profile.
You hear about this a lot in entrepreneurial companies that survive, and that is that they keep on working on the problem, so to speak. And that is that the problem may appear one way in the beginning, but over time, there's different adjustments and different pivots. So can you tell us a little bit about some of those pivot points, where you started out as a kind of a college-based program and you realized that wasn't quite working? What were the kind of what was the process?
Yeah.
Between moving from in essence, what was the pivot journey, and how does that business model look like now? What is that business model?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's actually one of the most probably interesting questions I get from most people, and that is we pivoted from the college model to the executive model because we figured there was a bigger market of people. That was always the plan. The plan was always to start with college students and trickle into the market. We realized college students were willing to pay, but it was very difficult to effectively retain college students as your supply chain. And so we made the difficult choice of shutting the wing back in Pippi down briefly. We were by that point we were at USC. We were also at UCLA, and so it was very difficult, to sort of realize that there's not the point there was supply chain attrition was the direct thing that caused this to basically pivot into the executive assistant for people and consumers. We started with that model, with the $10 a month model, to get basically an executive anything assistant. Again, we did that to get sort of capture virality, capture interest, and people really got interested when we launched it on product in February of 2020. You know, we were in 105 cities within 24 hours. You know, like it was
wow.
like, you know, the growth overnight was, you know, because people loved it. Everyone wanted a $10 assistant, you know, per month, by the way, for an unlimited assistant. In retrospect, right, that was a little bit foolish on our end, because our thinking was, we're going to build the ship as we fly it. Let's give people freedom. Let's have assistants, and let's have assistants share accounts and do stuff like that. And that was sort of like we did that for about 3 months. And then obviously the beginning of COVID already hit. So a lot of the kill use cases sort of went away. A lot of the things that people love this for, we had automated, like booking airplanes, like, hey, book me the cheapest flight to London and make sure it's first class. We'd go out, book you the cheapest flight, come back to you with the reservation code, boom. You know, hey, I have a dinner with my wife, can you get us a reservation? You know, we're building a lot of these automations. So we had the human element, which is like the assistant. We had the sort of almost like the autonomous car driving model, where our car was, you know, the company, our engine was our system, and our human driver was the assistant. And so our idea was to like automate as we went. Much more easier said than done, for sure. Very difficult to do.
Right.
And so ultimately, because of the shutdown, a lot of the cool use cases basically went away. Dinners, flights, a lot of the cool stuff. You know, people weren't traveling as much. So we realized, you know what, this is going to be challenging. There was never a point where we thought we were going to fail at this. It was more that, you know, we realized that we should probably do something about it. And then one of our company, you know, people that we were helping was a lawyer. He reached out to us saying, hey, you know, you guys want to do this for my business? I really could use this for my business. And then we had never thought about doing B2B, because obviously it's a whole different monster. And, you know, we said, yes, why not? We spent a month building the platform. He waited for us for a month. And we charged him, I think, $600 a month. And, you know, he liked it. And then we realized, okay, you know what? There's repetitive value there. And then he referred someone. And then obviously we realized, wait, there's something here. And then we realized, then we started digging more into the industry. Like, what is the VA space? What exactly is the VA space? Like the virtual assistant as like Google app, Siri, versus like the human element, right? And we wanted to sort of build, you know, like at that point, right, a platform where every company in the world could delegate work in one place and get it done reliably, and where we democratize the ability to get great labor from smart people, and at the same time, we, you know, on the supply side, right, we democratize a way for people to work remotely. Because again, a lot, we know during that time, you know, that kind of, you know, for everyone, right, that really changed the world. And so what we were doing was like, you know, almost like putting a Band-Aid on the problem. And so we started building more integrations, more platform stuff. And right now, we're building a lot more stuff into it. And so that the realization was, the pivot made sense because companies wanted this more than people. And so that's how we ended up here.
That's fascinating. That's great. And so what would you say, like how would you describe your current model?
Yeah, you know, right now I like to say that we're almost like the Amazon of services, right? We wanted to build a place where people can come, get reliable, you know, talent in a very managed way, right? So we didn't want to build like a Fiverr, an online jobs PH, you know, freelance.com, where there's millions of people looking for jobs, millions of people looking to get jobs done, a platform that just matches. So our sort of goal was never to build a freelance platform, because we saw that the process of getting that online is super difficult. You know, it's not managed, quality is an issue. There's no process. There's no project management to it that's already sort of embedded in. Yeah, Fiverr and you know, Upwork has those chat systems, but there's a lot more to that, right? And that we've actually we're building into that sort of shows that, you know, the general space of where we are now, right, is almost like a managed marketplace. You know, we want, you know, companies to come to us, you know, when they have something that they want to delegate, where it's a complex task, a very simple thing, right, or repetitive nature thing. And eventually we want to get back into the automation side of it, because there's a lot of opportunities for us to automate a lot of the work. But obviously a lot of the human components of it is you know, what companies really look for.
Nice. And so when you were evaluating, because oftentimes, you know, it's kind of funny, like people call it virtual assistants, but they're not really virtual. They're real people. So, and
yeah.
eventually, like you said, there's going to be the AI side. And in a way, like what you're doing in terms of your current model is kind of, in a way, like doing the lab work to eventually build the AI. and to basically build the standard operating procedures and to basically build out the information and be able to collect the data, which will make the operating system really, the AI system really operational and worthwhile. So in a way, you're building right now the information and the structure to eventually launch, like, you know, people often say, like virtual assistants, they use the example of the movie Her, you know, with the assistant that comes out of the box with the hyper intelligence and able to, you know, help and manage, you know, that idea of that digital helper. It's, you know, Siri is kind of like the beginning of that, but it sounds like what you're looking at eventually designing is something like the next level of what Siri is.
Right. Yeah. So that was always the vision. You know, obviously we're playing the long game here, and so a lot of the work, right, that the team members are doing, physical assistants are doing, right. It's almost like every company wants assistance in something, right? They're not just looking for like an EA. They're looking for help in a very specific area. And some of those companies, right, I would say 80% of them, right, they use the same 10 to 20 pieces of software in 5 or 6 different ways to update stuff, you know, extract stuff, remove stuff. Really matter things that a lot of these companies that are SaaS companies don't really want to build the work to like actually, they'll build a tool here, use it, and it'll work on its own, but it needs to be actioned by a human. We wanted to build a bridge to action it by itself. And so that's a long-term aim. I think the way you describe it is, you know, definitely like what we're trying to do. We want to, you know, I mentioned that, you know, we talk a lot with the people from the Amazon Alexa Fund. They're a great group there. They, you know, we still hope to collaborate with them, you know, in the sense that we want to build sort of like the action components of getting like real world services done. So that it's not just like, hey, what's the weather, what play this music, which can be accessed online, but it's actually triggering real skills, right, beyond turning on my lights. And so we wanted to really action that and create that first at this point company, you know, wide experience, and then take that back actually to people.
Nice. What are some of the suggestions you have for, let's say, a young Latino entrepreneur that's looking, or any entrepreneur for that matter? What are some of the recommendations you have to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a few. I mean, I think it depends on the industry they're in, but I think for the most part, the biggest things is like the world of starting companies, right, is, you know, is just like a roller coaster, right? The ups are high and the lows are super low. So I think the biggest thing for you know, if I was talking to someone right now that was a fellow founder or starting a company, you know, a few weeks ago, is both a privilege and a curse to start a company, right? The privilege is you get to start a company, and the curse is it's a very difficult journey. So the biggest thing is the work ethic component, right? So I think my tip is work like someone's trying to take this away from you every day, and then you'll get to a place where you want. Write stuff down. That's such a small thing. But you can only imagine the amount of times we've had meetings and nothing was written down, and then the next week we're not productive, or I had a really great idea, I didn't write it down. Write stuff down and plan it out. I think we like to say at this company, we like to play 3D chess, right? So think of starting a business like playing 3D chess, right? So at the 3-dimensional level, right? There's market, your competitors, there's yourself, there's your team that's gonna impact you, right? So what are the competitors doing? What's the market doing? What are you guys doing? I think the biggest thing for starting a company as well is like the amount of hours you put in are super important. You know, it's just like anything, right? Like if you wake up at 6 a.m. to go to the gym and you stay up at night and go back again because you're training for a marathon or for, you know, some sort of bodybuilding competition, it's gonna pay off. And in a similar way for a startup, right? If you're putting it in the work, I think, and, you know, obviously it's really talked about a lot, right? This idea of like, for me, non-complacency. I mentioned this from my dad a little bit. But I think it's like, do not be complacent. You know, it's like, oh, we did a lot of sales this month, or I got a lot of done today. Right? There's like an objective level that you meet your goals, or then there's like a feeling level. Do I feel like I met it? And so I think being able to distinguish and being able to be honest with yourself with that, write stuff down, plan it out, and have a non-complacent mindset. You know, like the fact that, you know, just to give you like a little bit of anecdotal, you know, when we had no capital. Right, we would go out to the bars in Newport Beach. I don't know if you've ever been to Newport Beach. There's a lot of bars out there. You know, a lot of local dive bars. There's a Little Caesars in Costa Mesa. We'd stop by Little Caesars, buy like 10 boxes of pizza, go out there, sell each of them to the people coming out of the bar at midnight for $8 a slice. The pizza costed $5. You can imagine the margins we were making on that. Like we would go out there and we would make it happen. You know, because we knew that we took Venmo, we took PayPal. with the cash. We even had a little, at some point we had a little merchant services device as well to take card. Like, and we raised enough, just enough, to get a car, did Uber, right? And put that into options, exited the options, sold the car, and it had a capital to start, right? And so I think the non-complacency aspect of that is what really gets you. You got to be willing to do what no one else is willing to do, and that's the biggest thing. And I think when I walk around people that are now entrepreneurs, I almost see them as like, not people that are different from me, but just people that like haven't really experienced like, whoa, actually, you don't have to work at a company. You can start your own company, whatever it is that you're interested in, right? You can make it a business, not just for the financial element of it, but just for the fact that you never have to depend on, anyone or anything, from impacting through your future. It's really like your future is in your hands. And that's usually not really the case for a lot of people. It's almost like at someone else's hands, at an HR person's hands. And so that sort of element to me, into the founders, right, is what drove me. Like, there's a realization that happens. And so,
I mean, that's certainly the balance. And also it also celebrates the risk as well, because part of that is having the courage to take that kind of risk and the wherewithal to live in the uncertainty and take on the responsibility.
Yeah.
So those are all things that are great.
Yeah.
Do you have a personal mission? Does the company have a mission?
So I mean, I guess the two questions are like me personally, yeah. I mean, I think I want to really build a company that touches millions of people, but more importantly, like I think a lot of the on the personal side, like my objectives, right, isn't to start a company and like go retire in like Cancun, right? That's not my goal at all. My goal is to start a company, take it public, and really leave a legacy for myself, right? I think of my parents, right? Like with so little, they did so much with so little knowledge of the world. We're now like, okay, well, it's not just because of an obligation, but it's almost like, wow, like for someone that didn't speak English to start a business, make it, and be middle-class person today, like not forget the financial side, but just like the accomplishment side. For me, my goal is like I want to build a public company that like lives. I don't want to use the word forever, but that lives long enough to transcend a few generations, so that people realize, well, this is actually something that you can touch. You can go to In-N-Out to touch a burger, right, and build it. You can also touch this company that someone like yourself built, right? And you don't really see that in Latino communities too often, right? In Baldwin Park, you don't really see that. You hear of companies, oh, what's Uber, stuff like that, but you don't really ever see it. And so I want to embody a sort of physical, spiritual representation of what that is. And so by building a legacy company, employs people. I think another part of me, I think that a lot of the problems that, a lot of the issues that, face the communities like Baldwin Park and just generally a lot of the things that inhibit people, right, can be, now that I've solved very complex business issues, I know that there is solutions to these problems, and it's not just like that. It's not just at the policy level, right? I think a lot of it comes from the capital part. A lot of it comes from like the strategy, right? Teaching the people certain things is important, but I think the more important thing is like connecting everything together, right? Like even from stuff like, I didn't know how to do my taxes. I mean, a lot of people don't even still know how to do their taxes for that matter, and that are, grown people, like something simple like that, right? If you go to Irvine, it's like, oh yeah, my dad does taxes. He taught me how to do it when I was 10. And it's like, whoa, what does that even mean? And so that's at the local level. Like I think I want to take a company that creates a legacy for myself that allows me to come back to communities like Baldwin Park, San Gabriel Valley, people that I grew up with in areas that I grew up working, the people just like me that if they had that single just extra little push or that extra ability, right, that will fundamentally change obviously the lives of certain groups of people. So I think doing stuff like that is something I'm interested in at the personal level. I think at the company level, we want to go IPO, and at the professional level, we want to keep building companies. We have lists of companies that we want to build. The lists really just go on as the kind of company that we want to build. And I think being a serial entrepreneur is something that at this point is inevitable for me and for a lot of the other founders, because we believe that, like, again, we want to build stuff because the journey is interesting, right? It's not just about like getting dirty rich, like a lot of people think about, right? Because it's, if you want to get dirty rich, this is not the place to be. Starting companies is not the place to be. I think that you have better chance with crypto. I think. I think I think if you want to build a company and you build it from the ground up, and the journey, I think, is what really matters. And what I mean by that, right? It's like the people that you start a company with, like watching them grow, watching yourself grow, being able to realize, holy moly, I survived the past 4 years. paying myself $1,000 a month, where 800 that went to rent and 200 went for food, right? What can I not do in this world if that's not the case, right? And so I think that's hopefully that sort of summarizes like my philosophy of it. But as a company, we want to start other companies. We have 5 or 6. I think the CEO, the most ambitious one, he wants to start basically a real estate company eventually that sort of emulates what Hong Kong metropolitan malls are, and so he wants to democratize like helicopter like travel for pedestrians. And he's really big into the mobility sort of transportation, wants to build stuff higher and sort of concentrate it so that people have access to like better jobs and things like that and transportation. So he's really forward thinking. Again, he basically is AI, but as a walking human. Or like, let's make it happen and figure out how to make it happen.
Nice. What has been one of the challenging, problems that you've faced as a company, and how did you guys solve it?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big problems was, for us was like getting the product out initially, right? That's always the hardest part. Like, how do you you build this cool thing? How do you push it out to people? Let's say we had $0, right? How do we actually get it in front of people? And so thinking about that, right, you can read a book and it'll tell you, well, you should market, you should use social media analytics or Google search or SEM. And sure, that all works if you have capital to throw money at that, right? And, we didn't want to go out and take out a loan for that because obviously it's a scary thing and hypothetical. So that's different things. So for us, it was deploying a product into the market and getting it in the eye of the people. So we really developed an interest in kind of this area of study called growth hacking. Maybe you've heard of it? So growth hacking, for those that don't know, it's just basically this area of a business study, modern, where companies basically hijack different strategies to go viral, right? Whether it's a guy climbing the Hollywood studio, Hollywood basically sign with the name on his shirt to get millions of people to Google that, right, and get interest. Whether it's like an influencer. I think for us, what we ended up doing, and this is kind of funny, but for the initial launch of the college model, right, we wanted to get it in front of the eyes of everyone. So we actually went out, we spoke to like the fraternity presidents of every fraternity in UCLA, UCI, got them all in the room, gave them basically swag and said, listen, this is a way for you to make money for just posting. We booked the room. We begged the professor let us in. We booked the room in each university. They would go out, recruit their team members to grow people, become brand ambassadors, right? And so we built like a commission-based structure for that, and then commission-based structure. And then we would basically we would come at midnight and put up these giant posters at the university. Obviously, it's always been, difficult. Generally, like growing international business is difficult of itself. I think nowadays the fundraising thing is probably the hardest thing, right? Because it's a battle against yourself, right? It's you want to get fundraising for your company, you want to grow your business. The market wants to do something else. Investors want something else. And so I think it's a lot of it is the difficult part. Externally was growing. Internally, right, was sort of the struggle against yourself. Have we done enough? It's almost like a 1,000-mile marathon that sometimes in between feels like sprints, and there's no immediate gratification, right? And I think for anyone building stuff, right, there never really is anything like going to the gym, getting results in a week. That's not going to happen. Not even in a year, maybe it won't happen. For businesses, right, it takes a long time to get an instant level of gratification. And so I think those are 2 challenges.
Tell me about how the culture in your company has evolved from the beginning, like the middle of the journey, where you are now in terms of where your culture is as a company, and where you see it going, evolving, changing.
Yeah, so we started as like a very heavy engineering company, right? We thought AI was everything, and it still is a meaningful part. There was very technical, very engineering type environment where if you were an engineer and you weren't a founder, it was very difficult to get involved with this. Not because we didn't want people, but just because there wasn't any roles for that. I think the culture has shifted a lot in the sense that now we celebrate people that want to build big things at this company. I say build big things, right? Not just at the engineering level, right? At the implementation level, strategy level. I think, for us, right, we love people that take initiative, and culturally speaking, right, we're a people-focused company because we're a lot of our human capital is driven through a lot of the team members that we have, and so we tend to allow people to really work on growing the divisions that they're in, and that's changed a little bit to where it used to be, where it was very heavy engineering, very like you do this and that's it, to now it's very much, we want people that want to win. We believe at this company that winning is a conscious choice. That people can consciously decide to win at anything that they're doing. And that's our model. And so, obviously we've learned that over the course of time. And so with that mindset and that sort of at our creed, our culture has sort of become a place where, the account managers that work with us, right, are not just sending nice emails, right? They're trying to create value for companies. They're putting on the CEO hats and really we give them that power to do that. And we set the expectation that they're able to do that, right? And that they have a support network here internally that's going to make it happen. At the recruiting level, same thing. When we're recruiting people, it's we want to democratize the ability to get a job, democratize the ability to get affordable team members, but more importantly, right, create a community where there's this kind of mutual respect of we want to collaborate together and get our company, their lives, our lifestyles to a better place than when it was yesterday. And so it's interesting in that way because it's coming out of COVID, right? A lot of people have this sort of change in perspective of like, oh wow, that's actually I want to be a part of, right? I don't want to work at the bank anymore because the bank just cut me off. They didn't care. I want to work at a place where people know my name. And I think that's a very important thing for us. We're, that's sort of how it's changed.
Nice. That's lovely. All right. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, Martin, and thank you for it's just been great to hear so much about your experience and about your journey. I wanted to give Nelson another opportunity if there was any closing questions you might have, Nelson, or ideas or thoughts or feelings. What do you think?
Really, thank you for sharing your journey with us, Martin. It's very inspiring to hear your process and the things that you've been working on and your vision for the future. Grateful to be here. And what is it, if someone wanted to hire Wing as a consultant company or hire you as a personal consultant to help build their business, how would they reach you and what would that look like?
Yeah, I think the way they reach me, I'm always available in my email, martin@gatewayapp.com. Basically live on the email 16 hours a day for the most part. Even when I'm not awake, I have a system that actually replies. So you'll always get a reply from me no matter what. I think someone wants to really, I think where we stand as a company, right? Our goal is to really allow companies to refocus their time on doing things that drive top line, right? There's a lot of little micro things or potentially medium-sized important things that companies do that are important, but the key employee should probably not be focusing on that, because there's so many bigger things that need to be done. And so oftentimes, right, it's very difficult to pay someone $100,000 a year to do like one thing, right? There often wear multiple hats. Sometimes that causes, the issues that were operations. Sometimes that causes issues with throughput. So for us, the way we help companies is we allow companies to, maximize, their employees' time working on stuff that truly matters and drives top line. And we sort of want to position ourselves in a way where if a company wants to save capital, and wants to focus on their growth, right? We want to figure out a way not just to do reactive work for them, right? We want to roll up our sleeves and really figure out what does it take for this company to get to 3x where they want to go? What does it take on our end to make that happen? And so oftentimes, right, a lot of the companies in this space, don't really get that opportunity. Yeah, so I think someone that get in contact with me, I think the way we help them, right? We basically equip companies with basically team members that can handle a lot of specialized work, and hence have a full remote workforce that's dependable. And I think if you sort of align your objectives of like, hey, I want to get to $1 million next year in sales, right? Okay, what are you doing now? What does that look like per month? What is each person doing for you? And so my sort of role in this is, and my objective as a company is to figure out like, as an assistant company, right? It's not just to provide you with a team member. It's what is the strategy or the path backwards to get to the goal that you want, right? If you want $1 million in sales, what does that look like from a team member? Like how many sales you do per month? How many calls? How many emails? What strategy, right? For example, like we really like to empower the AMs to think about this more critically. Is what are they doing to make sure the companies are getting active value as far as growing their business, saving costs, optimizing their workflows, keeping their team members sane. 100-hour week takes a toll on people. And so I think having that extra support in your hand, right? It's very much like for cruise control for your company, right? Keep it nice and smooth.
Yeah, well, one of the things that really excited me about Wing was that in looking at issues around like finding an assistant, and I think COVID really like drove this. Like traditionally, you would hire assistant and you would be working in the same offices. But with COVID, everybody was working remote. So it really opened up, I think, my eyes and a lot of people's eyes in terms of, well, maybe, since everybody's remote anyway, maybe there's an opportunity for, a more remote assistant, even thinking about the possibilities of finding someone offshore. So my process was, looking at the different companies and, Fiverr and Upwork, and working through these different companies to hire very specific people to do specific jobs. Like, let's say I wanted something with graphics, some editing, just very specific, kind of on a project by project basis. And, as I was thinking more about it, and, there were different issues of like security and like how to, if I'm going to have a personal assistant, they're going to have access to a lot of my information. Like if I want them like a normal personal assistant, there a lot of times they're accessing your email and personal information. Like, how do I balance that? And one of the things that I saw that was really attractive about Wing is that your company had solved some of those problems, things that would, become barriers of entry for having an assistant. Wing solved those problems. Can you share a little bit about that, about how you guys looked at the problem and then came up with different solutions to solve those problems?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the main issue with that whole space, right, is the fact that there's no way to centralize communication, centralize work, and centralize consistency. And so we wanted to create a platform where you can actually do that. And we're still building the new version, which you'll probably see it in a few weeks, actually, the new version of our web app. And that is like create a project management tool where you can manage team members, keep everything organized, credentials, workflows, things like that. I think the other one is the management component, right? Like I think where the fibers and others sort of lack is like the management component. A lot of these team members, right, like have they have their own routines, their own preferences, their own issues as well, right? And so I think oftentimes, right, when it's you and them by themselves, it's very difficult to have that support. And I think I've always, as a co-founder, I've always told the team, that the management process, the fact that it's a managed service, right, where there is someone always sort of aware of what's going on and there's a hierarchy in place, verticalized and horizontal, I think is the key thing that for us, right, it's like having roles of like, hey, we built this this platform and this sort of team dynamic so that everything is managed. I think that was a key thing. I think the other bit was process, with obviously interfacing process is very difficult for a lot of companies, right? Like investing time to process, stuff like Loom. We work with stuff like Loom to make that really easy. We're going to build our own very soon. I think a lot of it is right, understanding, right, the big key concern is, right, is will they work like effectively? Because I've never used them before. Solving that issue is managed and quality. Will they work consistently, right? And how will we track that? I have people in the loop that's up to date, that figures out issues, and that build systems that actually detect issues and stuff like that in real time. The other way for companies to give us feedback, like, hey, I haven't heard from this person in 5 days. Are they okay? As opposed to if you were on Fiverr, it's kind of game over from them, right? It might be this VA sick, or that your team member has a family emergency, something like that, right? So I think like we try to humanize the process of organizing labor, technology, and companies. And we always tell people at this company, at least internally, that this is a place where you're going to get to work with a lot of interesting companies from every color and sector of the world, music to AI. There's so many kinds of companies that work with us. And so I think the way we solved that was through quality enforcement systems, like that detect issues, hey, we haven't replied in this time, setting the right precedents in place and the expectations of like, here's how to simplify communication, setting the SOPs in place that are the top 5 general SOPs that will be successful, and implementing that so that everyone follows the same way and keep it very uniform. Things like that have really solved a lot of that.
Yeah, that's great. And I think for me, like one of the challenges was figuring out, the best way to work. And since I was used to doing everything myself, I hadn't really developed SOPs for someone else. And so creating those SOPs has been a real game changer for us. and actually working with our VA, we're actually work together. And as we're managing things, we're also fine tuning it in real time and creating operating procedures that then we are evolving together. And if there's what I call a breakdown in procedure, because I believe in a no blame environment. So if someone's working with me and we're managing a team together, there's never a time where they're to blame, because I don't believe in blame. I think blame is a waste of good energy. Instead, it's more of an innovative culture and an innovative model. And in an innovative model, there's no blame. There's innovation. And any time that there's a challenge or a breakdown in process, it's actually, what is the opportunity? First of all, what happened? And then what is the opportunity to create a better process?
Yeah.
And so working within that sandbox has been really very productive and really great for the whole process. And I can imagine a day where Wing, when you sign up with Wing, that you'll inherit a library of processes that you can actually customize to create your VA's day. Like, for example, email management, calendar management, certain like specific things that you could actually already have a template of processes to look at, that then you could say, this is not exactly, you could tailor it, but in the process of tailoring it, you're actually managing and creating your own processes, which then can be duplicated and improved over time. And all that data then could go back to the mother hive, as it were, to then continue to refine everybody's process and really have exponential growth and effectiveness, efficiency, and innovation. And that's a really exciting place to be at the center of. And it's been so wonderful speaking with you today, Martin, and you've been so generous with your time. And thank you, Nelson, for joining us and for sharing your feedback and your ideas and thoughts. And is there any question, Martin, that you would have liked to be asked that you weren't asked?
I mean, you got the full story. I think you got the full picture of my story of where I came from and kind of how I got here. I think maybe something that people would probably want to know is, how do I even get involved in a startup, right? How do I get involved in a business, right? That's growing. I think that's like maybe the only section that maybe like if someone that's of Latino descent, Hispanic descent, right, listen to this, right? Like what is their call to action, right? Listen to this, right? And I think about that, like their call to action is, how do I get involved? How do I start, right? And I think the biggest answer is YouTube. YouTube has so much information, right, about companies, startups in general, like what a startup is, right? Startups are not always just software and technology, right? I know people that create like cake companies that they give me cakes for my birthday because I work with them and they're awesome, right? Or people that want to start like a financially sort of segmented coffee brand for people that are enthusiasts in New York, right? So I think the biggest way is like, it's for whoever's watching this, I think it's the way to get involved in a startup, right, is you start by researching what a startup is. And I think YouTube is your best friend, right? Subscribing to a lot of the YouTube or articles that talk about what's new startups, right? Maybe you go to downtown LA, you see those Lime bike scooters, right? Google Lime scooter, see and see where that journey takes you, right? And really follow it through and really figure out how did it even get there, right? And I think element is something that people will get excited about, realizing like, oh wow, this came from a manufacturing plant that was and someone thought about how to distribute these scooters out, and that person can also be a version of yourself in the future for a different application.
Nice. That's beautiful piece of advice. And thank you so much, Martin Gomez from Wing AI, for sharing your journey and for being with us here at Char. And if you enjoyed the video and enjoyed the conversation and would like to hear more conversations, please subscribe. And thank you all for joining us on this journey. And we look forward to our next conversation with you. Thank you.